Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my channel, Jackson's Journal, and another edition of Gospel Stories series. And in this three-part series, I'm talking about Jesus in the temple. And the thing that brought on this whole discussion this teaching that I'm doing is I was in a Facebook discussion with a friend named Kenneth, who identifies as an atheist. He made the point that the prosperity preachers that we know in America today are the equivalent to the money changers in the temple, and that's why Jesus showed anger and overturned the tables in the temple. And he was drawing a parallel between the two, and my argument is no, he was not against the profit side of the thing. And there is no comparison to what the prosperity preachers of today in America, even though they may be doing well, let's say, financially from their message and from their constituents buying their products. It's not the same thing. It's not on the same parallel. I want to get more into that. But before I do, I want to, in part two, I talked about the timeline and when Persia took over Babylon. They conquered Babylon. About 44 years, I believe. No, 48 years. So the Babylonians had the Jewish people in captivity for 48 years. And then in 539 BC, the Persian Empire conquered Babylon, and of course they inherited a bunch of Jews. Now, in 537, that's when they started making plans to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild things. And of course they had to rebuild the walls too, not just the temple. And of course you want to know about rebuilding the walls, read Ezra and Nehemiah. That's what they talk about. But anyway, they didn't start constructing the new temple until about maybe 523 or 522 BC. And they finally finished the temple around 515, 516 BC, somewhere around there. We don't have exact dates for this, but we got good ballpark dates. And of course, I already told you about Herod in 23 BC, how he remodeled, renovated the temple, and also expanded the entire complex. And then I showed you this drawing, which is an archaeologist's rendition of what they think that the temple looked like back in the days. I established that this is the south entrance where most people entered in. Of course, this is Solomon's porch. This is the east entrance. When Jesus came into Jerusalem on his final Passover, and when there were palm branches on the road and he was riding on a donkey and the donkey was walking on the palm branches, this is where they rode up to, the eastern entrance. Of course, here you have the court. Here's the temple itself. Okay. Now, you have the temple, and then you have the Holy of Holies back here. Of course, inside the temple, only the priests could get in there, and that's where they had the showbread, the menorahs, and stuff like that. And then the Holy of Holies, only the high priest could get in there once a year to offer the blood of everything that was sacrificed for the remission of all the sins of Israel for that year. It was an annual thing. Now here you had the court of the Israelites. Any Jew could come in here and offer their sacrifice. The priest would take it. Then they would go beyond this wall. Between this wall and the temple itself, they had a cistern, an altar of some sort, where they actually burnt the offerings, burnt the sacrificial animals. That's where they did it. And so they didn't actually do that inside the temple. That was done outside the temple, but not in the court of the Israelites. So to be a Jew, you had to get in here. Now, when Jesus was 12 years old, most of you probably know the story about Jesus when he was 12 and he was in the temple for, 3 or 4 days, something like that, several days, more than one day. And Mary and Joseph noticed that he wasn't with them, with the entourage they were traveling with. So I had to go back to Jerusalem and look for Jesus. More than likely, I would say my best guess, he was probably in here. He could have been over here or over here, but My best guess is he was here somewhere talking to the teachers of the law. Now, I didn't talk about the entrance. Now, in the west side of the temple complex, you had multiple entrances that was exclusively for the priests and maybe the Sadducees, the high ups. They could go in there. Those were the private entrances, but the public entrances was the east entrance here and the south entrance here. Of course, they went under tunnels and came out here and stuff like that. Now, have you ever seen Jewish people on the news praying at the Western Wall? Well, they weren't praying at the Western Wall of the actual temple. They were praying at the Western Wall of the platform of the foundation. They were praying at the retention wall. Like, look at this eastern wall right here. That's a retention wall holding up the platform, okay, for the temple, okay? So that was like your foundation for the temple complex. So that's where they were praying at. They were praying at the retention wall, not at the actual temple itself. The western wall for the actual temple itself does not exist. The Romans took care of that in 70 AD. So that is about it on the recap, and let's see what else. I covered everything. Okay, good. Now let me move on, and first let me talk about the commerce that went on inside. Now all the commerce, like I said, this commerce went on in the temple courts here. Here's where the money changers were. Here's where the livestock vendors were. They weren't in here. They were here in the temple courts. Now, let me explain to you the commerce of what went on in the temple complex itself, and then you're going to have a better understanding why it doesn't compare to what Paula White and the other prosperity preachers do. First of all, everything went through the money changers because in order for a Jewish male 20 years or over, because every Jewish man 20 or over was required to pay an annual temple tax of a half shekel, okay? And also any Jewish person making their pilgrimage to the temple, their annual pilgrimage to make their sacrifice, in both cases, that had to be paid in temple currency, the temple tax and the cost of the animal that you're using to sacrifice. It had to be paid in temple currency. Well, people from all over the world, Rome, Greece, Persia, wherever, Jews that lived, because not all Jews lived in Judea. A lot of Jews lived outside of Judea and had to commute once a year, make a pilgrimage. And sometimes the countries they lived in didn't have temple currency, so they had to take their currency from their nation, get it exchanged. That's where the money changers came in. So you had to go into the temple courts to do that, okay? Then once you got your temple currency, then you could pay your temple tax and then buy your animal. Well, here's where the problem lied. You could only buy an animal that was sold in the temple courts. There was some good old boy favoritism going on, okay? In order to be a preferred animal vendor, you had to suck up to the Sadducees in order to get your booth and bring your animals in here and sell your animals, okay? If you were not sucking up to the priest and the Sadducees, you were not going to be selling sacrificial livestock, okay? So the reason Jesus called it a den of robbers is because these guys had an unfair corner on the sacrificial livestock market. Jesus didn't have a problem with them selling sacrificial animals. He just had a problem doing it in the temple courts. If the vendors were outside the temple courts, it opens the market up to all the livestock vendors. They could all sell their animals on a fair and level playing field. But if you've got an unfair corner on the market, you can artificially inflate the price of a sacrificial animal. Another thing is the sacrificial animal had to be in tip-top condition and had to be inspected by a priest. An animal wasn't going to get through this gate right here and be offered up as a sacrifice here unless a priest first inspected the animal and says, yes, this animal meets specifications, you can sacrifice this animal. If somebody bought a lamb, a dove, or whatever outside the temple, brought it in the temple and brought it to be sacrificed, the priest could look at, a corrupt priest could look at the animal and say, well, sorry, this animal's not good enough to be sacrificed, but you can buy one over there. See, that's what went on. That's where the robbery existed, okay? So, yeah, that's the point, yeah. So that's why it's not like Paula White, because with Paula White, you don't have to buy her products. You don't have to buy her DVDs. You don't have to buy her books. You don't have to donate to her church, okay? And you can still be a Christian, okay? But in order to be a Jew, you had to pay your temple tax and you had to make an annual sacrifice at the temple. You had to do that. And they put the corner on it. That's why that was corrupt and robbery. Now, let me check my notes here real fast, make sure I'm covering everything. Okay, now let me go ahead and break down the verses. Now, when Jesus' public ministry as the Messiah lasted about 3.5 years. And the Gospels record 2 occasions where Jesus overturned the money changers, overturned the tables, and ran out the money changers and the livestock vendors. The first incident was Jesus' first Passover, because he attended a total of 4 Passovers during his public ministry. So the first one was recorded in John 2:13 through 16. Now, this was about 6 months after he was baptized by John the Baptist. So he hadn't been in his public ministry that long, just about a half a year. So he goes into the temple. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins on the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. How dare you turn my father's house into a market? So it was a market issue at that time when he did it the first time. Now the second time was his 4th and final Passover. It was just days before he was going to be crucified. So fast forward 3 years into the future. Matthew's gospel, Mark, and Luke's gospel cover that event, where only John's gospel covered the first event. So you can find Matthew's account in Matthew 21:12, 13, Matthew chapter 21, verse 12 and 13, Mark chapter 11, verse 15 through 17, and then Luke's gospel, chapter 19, 45 and 46. Now, in their accounts, they pretty much agree. I think Mark has a couple of distinctives that are different than the other 2 gospels, but let me let me show you what it looks like here. What I did is I took the 3 gospels and lined it up and paralleled it up. Okay, so the verses that read the same are all in the same parallel. Here's where Mark had a little different version that Matthew and Luke don't mention. So that's how I lined it up. So that way I can give you the full essence of what went on the 4th time. But basically, Jesus entered the temple, drove out all those who were selling there. Didn't mention anything about cattle and sheep in the second event, but they did mention selling doves. Didn't mention anything about the whip. The whip was the first time in John's account. And then, of course, Jesus said, after he drove them out, he said, it's written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer. In Mark's gospel, he said, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. So Mark's gospel was the only one that mentioned all nations. But then Jesus said, but you have made it a den of robbers. So the robbery issue was brought up on the second time that Jesus did that. I don't know if Jesus cleaned out the temple, the money changers on his second and third Passovers. The Gospels don't make any mention of it, so we have to assume that he only did it the first and fourth Passover in his public ministry. So that is basically it. Let me make sure I covered all my bases here. So that's why I don't think it's the same thing as Paula White and the prosperity gospel preachers and the way they've profited. As repugnant as I find their message to be and out of sync with what Jesus actually taught, not quite the same. But anyway, I hope that's been helpful to you guys. Thank you for watching my videos through this series, three-part series, the Gospel Stories series, Jesus and the Temple. Please click the thumbs up button if you like my teachings. Also, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and also click the bell in the upper right-hand corner. And so that way you'll be notified when I make an upload. So stay safe and God bless.